Hello, this is Dan Housman, and I'm here with another episode of the Gradical Novel Cohorts podcast. I have with me here Joe Dustin. He's been a great industry expert in clinical trials, clinical operations, real world data throughout the years. I originally met him at a conference where he was working at metadata at the time, and he was wearing about 12 different wearables as he presented, and you could watch his blood pressure go up and down. Um, he's just a great expert and innovator in this space and has been around the block from CROs to pharma companies to EDC companies. And I think he's now on his own. I'll let him introduce himself and talk a little bit about his background and how it shaped his thoughts around how EHRs come into play for clinical research.
That's great. Thanks, Dan. Great to see you again. It's been a while. Um, Thanks for the intro. My name's Joe Dustin. I've been in this clinical research industry for about 20 years. I've worked. I've always like straddled the line between clinical operations and sort of the digital future, if you will. Whether I was inside pharma or at a vendor company, I've always focused on using technology to make trials faster, more efficient, and more human-centered, if you will. I've spent a number of years at various companies in various roles. I've been in project management, operations, delivery, sales, product development, consulting, strategy, management. So I've held a number of different roles. I guess the highlights are I spent 12 years at Medi, is where you and I met, and a number of key roles there. Then I spent some time at Bristol Myers Squibb as the head of clinical innovation. So that was during COVID, so it was a weird time. We tried to break a lot of things, but it was things were already broken because of COVID. So we had a very interesting time there. While I was there, one of the I guess the two main things that I got done with my team was figuring out eSource and the whole EHR to EDC thing in the very beginning of that movement, um, and then decentralized trials. From there, I went to Medable for a few years, worked on eCOA, and then to Bioformers, where we worked on digital biomarkers and had even more wearables strapped to my body on various remote patient monitoring signals for real-time detection and biomarker development. Today, I am a independent consultant at the moment, at least in 2025, and my firm is called Dauntless eClinical Strategies, and I just help life science companies, both sponsors and vendors, navigate sort of digital transformation, especially around AI, digital endpoints, e-source, and eClinical technology. That technology stack that we've had for many years, it's changing, it's evolving. It kind of goes through. We're going through another one of those every 10-year cycles right now. I've seen three of these major transformations. One was on premise, paper to electronic, on premise to the cloud, and now whatever AI is going to transform is substantial enough where it is a major paradigm shift in how we're operating in clinical research, how we operate clinical trials, how we find patients, how we move data, how we do everything. And so I'm pretty excited to talk to you about all this today.
Awesome. Let's dig right in. What do you think the pressing problems are? I guess we'll center ourselves in clinical trials, where electronic health records can help. Because we at Graticule and the RWE universe is swinging into the clinical ops world, but maybe we're all swinging together into the same shared space. But where do you think the EHR could help, and what's the problems where we could even solve?
Well, there's a number of use cases that if you can tap into EHR systems in the US and even globally, there's a number of things you can do once you're there. Um, and it's not, the EHR to EDC thing is defined as moving data from an electronic health record system in the healthcare world into a clinical trial data capture system in the research world, which is not the same. The data doesn't always map directly. The standards are not the same. And I think in most cases for EHR systems, the data is not structured. So there is structured data like labs and different types of demographics, medical history, and whatnot. But a lot of that stuff is in unstructured notes, as we would see normally. Um, and so there's a few use cases we could use this data for. Number one that I think is taking hold right now is tapping into EHRs where clinical research is being conducted to avoid what it was in data management world, to avoid what we call the swivel chair data entry problem at clinical research sites that are conducting trials and using the system that they want to use, which in hospitals and academic centers and whatnot is typically in the EHR where all their data is stored. And they don't want to have to go copy it here and then copy it to another system like an EDC. And it could just be nice if I just click a button and it just moves over and grabs what I need. And then my workflow becomes a confirm, 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 as opposed to a typing it, and usually probably with interns and other staff I need to bring on to do it quickly. Um, so that's one use case. I think we'll talk a lot about that today. Second use case, I think, is for EHR, the matching of inclusion criteria and various types of demographics and medical history and medications and whatnot for patient matching from an EHR as one of the primary sources for clinical trial recruitment. There's a few different ways to do this. There's the top of the funnel way and the bottom of the funnel way. Top of the funnel is using the basic data from an EHR that's exposed and matched to a protocol's inclusion criteria to then return a list of patients that you need to then go call or email or drive ads to or somehow get their attention. And then you have to do further pre-screening on them and decide whether or not they actually can enroll, and they decide whether they even want to enroll at all. So there's the top of the funnel matching that can be done with the EHRs once you get into the data, once you get into the systems. The bottom of the funnel option is sort of EHR record retrieval, where in the like complex oncology studies, you can grab the data which you will need, I think, for qualification and screening and sort of inclusion criteria checking, because they're very complicated, right? In oncology studies, you have to check a lot of information. You need the full records to sort of do that even at the top of the funnel, right? But doing that usually costs a little bit more money and takes a bit more time. It is a complicated process, but there are technologies out there that are being developed that are getting at this data in a much faster way. I've seen, even in a personal situation, it takes almost a month to get some of these records for these reasons. It shouldn't take that long, especially if you're in a clinical trial scenario where you may not have a month, right? And um, the bottom of the funnel scenario is once this patient has been pre-screened through maybe one of these other matching protocols, that you then retrieve the records for everything else that you need for just to get the records into the study for integrated evidence, not necessarily a real world data pull, but just the records you have that you need, especially in an academic or a hospital research setting. You need those records to be transferred to the clinical trial. So that's three options for EHR. So we have the EHR to EDC, we have patient matching, and we have record retrieval. There are other use cases, I think, in a real world data sense where you're doing sort of more, not registries, but more of these like searching for cohorts of patients out there in the real world through EHRs as a way to just follow them long term. This is when you get into the topic of we've had for some time called tokenization, which when I was in pharma, we called it lifelong follow-up. And you're then grabbing EHR data through tokenization, which is in the real world just a blinded way to grab your data from the ether after you've completed your clinical trial, and we can just keep track of how you're doing for as long as we need without capturing any of your identifiable information. And so that's another way that getting into this more, the EHR data across the world is being more aggregated now and put to use in those cases for not only tracking patients long term to see how a drug is doing in the market, but also maybe to help define and design trials in the future.
Well, let's go back a step to this HR to EDC EHR sourcing world. What's the benefit to the sponsors? What's the benefit to the sites? And I'll probably add this question. Seems pretty simple. Why isn't it done? It's like in 30 years, we have had things like Epic since 2008. It's 2025. What what's taken so long? And
I'd also ask, why do we still have fax machines anywhere?
right?
Why are those still alive? I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm just
Same
curious,
reasons, right? Yeah.
are the benefits not outweighing the cost to change? Is there certain barriers you think that are there and are breaking down?
Yeah.
I'd love
No,
to
yeah,
get
there are a few reasons. Part of it is the perceived barriers to change are too high for people to care as much. And also the incentive structures are different, right? In clinical trials, we have a very unique scenario, which is in a B2B scenario, is more common than not. But in our use case, it's a bit different. The people who buy the technology, the people who fund the technology, and the people who use the technology could be three different people versus direct to consumer, where the person that's buying it's going to get all the value out of it. And that's an easy exchange, right? But in our world, you might have a sponsor paying for it, a CRO implementing it, a site using it, and their incentives are completely different. So the site wants to use it to make their life better. The pharma company is like, well, I would love to make your life better, but really I don't care, because I'm just going to pay you to do whatever, and I want you to do it my way because we're trying to maintain the integrity of our data and we need to prioritize what we need. The You've probably heard of the topic like the sponsor of choice programs, right? To sort of work better with sites, and of course we all every pharma company would tell you, especially even CROs would say we need to have good relationships with our sites. Yeah, we need to. I'm in a hospital right now. Speaking of the dumb, you can hear that background.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
somebody's telling me right now. So that's where we are.
So you think a lot of the challenge is just this split of who buys it, who uses it, and it's just also some of these incentives we think would naturally be there, but there's a challenge, right?
There's a challenge.
The incentives aren't 100% aligned. Are they aligning better now,
I
or
think they are aligning a little bit better, right? So we have sites in a sponsor of choice scenario where sites are in a competitive enrollment scenario. That is one of the incentives that matters because a pharma company is going to want to make it easier to work with them for the sites that are just going to give their patients to another sponsor's trial that's easier to work with. So if you become the one easier to work with, I can enroll fast. I can click a button and get all my data in. I can use a number of more modernized tools to make my workflow more efficient, or I can use even my own systems that I already have in your study. I'm going to prefer to work better the way it works better for me as a site. Um, Even if you're trying to give me stuff, sites are still getting on average like 20 plus systems, not per study, but like overall across all their sponsors. It's just way too many systems to log into, and it's getting ridiculous. And so we need to reduce those. The EHR barrier has always been data standards, data accessibility, and standard is not data standards, but standardization of how we acquire data. In pharma, they cannot, and I dealt with this a little bit when I was at Bristol Myers. They have a real problem with optionality and flexibility. Similarly to how we made, talked about how decentralized trials was the key to that was optionality for patients. Um, Optionality for pharma sometimes isn't looked upon as good because they want one SOP, one process for everyone. And then they just do that and they abide by it. If there's any deviations, they record it, they log it, they handle it. But there's always one way to do it. If you have the sites tapping into their EHRs and acquiring data that way, you might have how many different processes for how many different sites? And then is it a custom integration for that site? Do we have to do that every study or just once? It's just these things that like, well, we don't really know the answers to that and we don't have time to deal with it. I'm not putting it on my study timeline to figure it out. So we're not doing anything. It's usually down to timelines and the team that's running the study. No one's figured it out in a standard way centrally, and they just don't want to deal with it on their study. That's one barrier, right? It's people, it's time, it's process, it's priorities. Um, but mostly no one would disagree that it's a good idea, right? Um, One would say in some cases the data quality would improve because there'd be less queries, less deviations, less issues because it's coming straight from the source. Others would say, I don't trust the data in the EHR at all because garbage in, garbage out. But I would also say that it depends what you're using it for. If you're taking retrospective data, um, we all know in EHRs, like a lot of the data in there is meant for billing purposes, which means there are things in there that aren't necessarily as accurate as you would want because they put the codes in and the right things in there to get the insurance to cover it, not necessarily because you have that condition as coded, right? And so there's always up and down when it comes to data quality and data integrity, but that's for more like screening and matching and things like that. For prospective data entry in the EHR for the trial, that's usually legit. Whatever's in a structured data field goes in and maps to an EDC. Whatever's an unstructured note can be grabbed now by an AI or some kind of NLP type tool to go through the notes, grab what's necessary, and start to map that and classify it for where it would go in the trial. And so barrier has been that technology has not existed, not been easy to use, has been expensive, and not scalable or widespread. But now it's changing. I'll give you a couple reasons why the barriers are coming down. All right. Number one, Fire HL7 is the standard in healthcare for interoperability, portability of data under HIPAA, right? That you need to be able to get your data out. The HL7 messages how lab data gets around to different hospital buildings, to how you can get it to your lab portal, etc. It also is how you can get your healthcare data anywhere. Research doesn't talk HL7, although there are some pharma companies that are starting to ingest HL7 data directly and skipping over CDISC, if you will. CDISC ODM anyway, to go straight into their ecosystem because they want to start speaking the language of sites more natively. Two things happened. Number one, Fire HL7 reached a milestone version update a couple years ago, Fire HL7 4.01, I think it was, that was mandated by the US government that every hospital or anyone getting federal funds or something under the one of these acts out there, just escaping me at the moment, you will be fined if you don't have this up to date. So most hospitals, especially the big ones, updated everything. And do you remember like 2 years ago around Christmas time when all of a sudden you could Google search some doctors, and like ones in California, all of a sudden you could schedule a doctor's appointment on a Google search just like you did a restaurant reservation?
Hmm.
Like in the Google results page, you could schedule a doctor's appointment. It's because of that update. Data was made more open and interoperable. And that's how the real world data companies, the aggregators, all of a sudden their business started going up because they were able to get access to much more data. As a result, interoperability between EHR and EDC just got easier, not because EDC can talk HL7, but because more and more of these data are becoming more structured out in this clinical trial aware, if you will. The third thing is a project at HL7 called Project Vulcan. Project Vulcan is meant to make most of HL7 clinical trial native, so that you could have the idea of a protocol ID, a site ID, the inclusion criteria, schedule of events, the table of scheduled assessments, all natively understood in an EHR what that means. And so that just makes a clinical research trial in an EHR that much easier. And that's still a couple years away from getting there, but that has made strides. So the access to data has become easier.
So it sounds like there's this. I love your picture of these different waves. This new wave you characterize to being this AI wave, but it's also backed by this interoperability wave that's popped up a couple of years ago. So we're in a combination of events. I wouldn't say necessarily the perfect storm, because we're in a world that moves slow, but
You
it's a
need that
storm of
though,
these,
right? Like,
right? These two things are both necessary, right?
yeah, you need that. If I make a comparison to the first wave of clinical research technology innovation in the early 2000s, right? You had electronic data capture was like a one of the major moves that like transformed the way clinical operations works. It was and it wasn't, right? It was because it put things online and allowed clinical sites to get their data online faster, which got sponsors to get the data faster, which, I mean, what was the primary reason for EDC? What was the main value point we sold to pharma? It reduces your time to database, right? That was the main like driver. And but it floated on top of other IT transformation. It didn't just do EDC because it was a good idea. They did it because they were already going paper to electronic in IT and moving to the cloud. From these on-premise software as a service started becoming a thing. Budgets were being redone. If that wasn't happening, this never would have been adopted, right? As fast as it was. And it took many years to get there. But in the early 2000s, I remember, was it 2006? And when I was at Medidata, Amgen was one of their early clients. And I remember in 2006, they put out a press release saying that 90% of their studies will be in EDC in 1 year. And when Amgen does something, they put their entire company behind it, and like nothing else happens until that gets done. Like a major in ClinOps, right? They've done this a few times with the protocol design and other types of technology initiatives, but they did it. They were successful in it, and the entire company went EDC in 1 year. They got every single trial started and moved there, and that was early for the industry, if you would. And they were doing it the
Well,
new way, right? In those early days, they were still shipping laptops on premise the old way. And, a couple crazy guys from New York in metadata said, we're going to use the open internet because that's where things are going. We're going to do it in a browser. We're not going to
Yep.
install anything. And that was like, you guys are crazy.
And you're like,
But
we
that's,
adopted quick. Um,
they were already ahead of the game when it became normal. Right. And that's the kind of thing we're starting to see now with this next, we're floating on top of an infrastructure change that's moving more toward an AI driven build, design, extract, use case of the data analytics also. Um, and the EHR to EDC thing is happening, and there are other things that are riding the wave of that as well to get into the data and make clinical operations and data management more efficient, reduce cycle times, all that kind of stuff.
so it sounds like whatever Amgen did worked great with EDC. I'm curious how you think pharma should go about adopting these capabilities. Like, should they take an Amgen approach? I think it is slightly different, which makes it challenging that um, there's other people involved, right? So if Amgen's trying to adopt EDC, it's like, hey, here's our EDC system. Now it's how are we going to interface with all these decision makers who control this really powerful asset, but also a very restricted asset called the HR. And can you do this in a year? Should it be done incrementally with pilots? How do you feel about the pilots that have been done in the past versus what they should be doing going forward? So what do you think the adoption, if you were now back in a pharma company like you once were, what would you recommend they do?
Great question. So I'll use in my consulting practice, I'm working with some pharma companies that are doing just this, right? And so there are active things happening, and most of the major pharma companies now have an initiative for what you would call EHR to EDC, which is tied into multiple initiatives at a digital strategy level, right? Dealing with real world data, dealing with recruitment, dealing with just enhanced data management. They're their data management departments are migrating, and they have been for some years, from a clinical data management group to a clinical data science group. There have been two different groups at the same time, but the roles are changing, right? The role of data management has completely changed. The Society for Clinical Data Management put out a paper on this in 2016 on how everything's going to change over the next 10 years. And we're pretty much there at this point. So they were spot on because the robots are doing the work now. And for good reasons, because they're going to do things way faster. But now the people are doing different jobs, right? Um, which is how part of how the adoption changes, because in the EDC world, if I make a comparison, we adopted technology, but the process, honestly, the process was horrible. It didn't change. They were still collecting data on paper at the sites. They were still using binders, and they were still transcribing stuff into another system that pharma gave them. They didn't change the way they did anything at the sites. They just, instead of sending the paper out for someone else to deal with it, they made the sites do it, right? And the adoption of that was faster because we didn't really disrupt how the sites worked. But pharma got a benefit of getting things faster by paying the sites to do a little bit extra work to get the data up online so they could do the review and queries and SDV and all that kind of stuff, right? Now, in this paradigm, the process has to change because we can't, because now sites are starting to adopt their own technology, which is meaning they're digitizing their own operations for their own benefit. Hospitals, academic centers, large sites are already having an EHR because they treat patients and they see patients, and they have a cancer center and they do whatever they do, a research hospital. The sites that don't have an EHR are also digitizing their own operations. So your smaller independent sites, your site networks, and those that are in different parts of the world, in different parts of the country, even that are in rural areas and areas that are tough to get to. Um, and so the adoption of that is increasing, so that you have more sites coming online and ditching their paper process and changing their process, which now allows this new connection to happen. So let me go back again. So this is happening on the side, right? From what comes to pilots and how to adopt it. When a pharma company wants to start doing this, when I was at BMS, we did three or four pilots in a sense of within a year. I would say maybe a little less than a year. We piloted three different EHR to EDC connections. I'd say one was on a spreadsheet only and a mapping exercise with data management, and two of them were in live studies, where a couple sites at at production studies, right? And then it just got bigger from there. They ended up doing about 10 to 13 studies or so in that model. It's, as far as I know, still going on. But they saw massive cycle time reductions in data management. And then a cost decrease in there. It was like a 44% cycle time reduction by getting data faster, by having it higher quality and accurate the first time. And they were just doing source data review, not source data verification, right? So a lot of that stuff went down. But it took a number of pilots and a number of realizations in what tools were doing what and why, and at what sites that was worth it. So the first time we did it, a lot of these companies were claiming, you're going to get like 60, 70% of your data from an EHR into your ECRF. Cool. First time around, we only got 18%. So not at all accurate. So it was a high expectations, low delivery. Not because the company was any good. It's just that the data was not what we needed. And also a lot of these EHR to EDC initiatives, the big percentage of data and the workload reduction is based on lab data that's in the EHR, right? Especially in oncology studies. Did you know it takes about 3 hours per patient that a clinical coordinator has to deal with just to get that patient's data organized? Most of that is because of the lab data and all the labs that they take and they need to grab, and how they're transcribing it into like a portal from a CRO, which
Mhm.
then is manually organized and harmonized and delivered to a sponsor. In this case, they just click a button and the data goes. But in some cases, the pharma company doesn't want to put their lab data into EDC. It's got to go somewhere else. And that company that has the EHR to EDC feed can't put the lab data in any other place besides EDC.
There's
So,
nowhere to put like the
well,
EDC, or it's
EDC systems have lab modules, at least the two big ones do, but a lot of them don't support HL7, right? So you can't get the message to come over. It's like they're used to like batch loads from central labs. It's not the same thing. In which case, these EHR to EDC feeds in the early days, this was like 2021, we were doing this. Um, it was to one endpoint. But the idea is it's going to go to multiple places. It might go to EDC, it might go to a data lake, it might go to some other staging environment where it's then, conformed into a newer standardized format, right? Um, and so the adoption of this was through many pilots. We realized some of the data we're not getting as much as we thought. So, and that's for certain kinds of studies that maybe it's not worth the effort. It's just sites aren't already having an EHR. There were other companies we used where we did get about 60% of the data. And the reason we got the 60% of the data was because they went after the unstructured data also. The early EHR to EDC companies, and many of the ones today still, are only grabbing structured data from a Fire HL7 feed, and it's not enough. It's not enough. We need unstructured data to make any difference in the real value to what pharma would measure as that worked and that was worth our time, right? So now with AI and the ability to grab that data and parse it through and then categorize it and map it and go, it's possible, and it's happening. And there are companies that are doing this now, and they're only getting better at it.
yeah.
Um,
I guess I'd add on this one, Joe. This is from our own experience. You know, the reason why unstructured data is hard is because it has PHI in it, and everybody's afraid of the PHI. It's like, oh, toxic waste, don't touch this thing, because if we pass along PHI to a pharma company, now everybody's got to have a BAA, and it gets complicated. Um, but one of the big benefits of AI we've seen in the last few years, and we've employed it in the work we're doing, is we can get HIPAA certified great subcomponents to de-identify the unstructured data before we process it with all the other AI, meaning we can move it, which is actually a huge piece, because we can't move it. We have to move all the AI to where the data is. And that gets complicated, right? Because moving data is hard enough, but moving AI into data creates its own issue. And so, we're enjoying the fact that now we have this new set of components where we can just bring in all the unstructured data, put it into our cloud, and operate against it with the pharma company, right? Instead of having to ask the site to go operate against it independently.
it brings up an interesting question about data harmonization and who should do it. Example, the early days of eCOA, where I was doing patient report outcomes on Palm pilots and then eventually to smartphones and the web. Those disparate point solution companies that only had eCOA. They would always get a data management spec from the sponsor and say, and you just send me data in this format. Usually it's an SDTM format, and drop it on a file drop like a FTP site, and then I'll take it in. I don't think we can do that with sites in the, like, that is not something that can scale to every different data source, right? Sponsors, I think, are wrestling with the idea with, if we are going to go from an e-source system or an EHR system or something, we should be able to take that data in whatever it comes in, and you know spin it around in a in a centrifuge and pop it out in the standard format that we need. But do we need to ingest everything to do that, or do we still only ingest what we need? Like, is there anything you need for context? It's like bringing the AI to the system. Can you do that all there and then bring it in, or do you have to grab it all first and then spin it? And are you grabbing things that you shouldn't be? Right. There's a lot of data in the EHR. You mentioned PHI. You want to avoid as much as that as possible. And then in e-source systems that are also seen like site CTMS type systems that also have data capture, direct data capture capabilities. Those systems don't speak fire. They're not in EHR, but they're also have the ability to be extracted from and pull data into sponsor infrastructures. They could speak CDISC ODM at the minimum, but should they also be following through the same pipe as the EHRs? In a way, when I think about adoption and standards and bringing the AI in what direction, um, I almost see, again, because the infrastructure is changing before our eyes and other initiatives are floating along the same transformation that's happening. You're going to have the EHR to EDC thing happen. The AI is probably going to make that faster, and it's probably going to be at the sponsor side that grabs it and transforms it. Then you're going to have these e-source systems that are not EHRs that are going to be also flowing through the same pipes, because pharma is going to take a year to validate some connection that they want everybody to just use. Some pharma companies are going to say, no, we'll just have 5 different pipes from, we just want whatever the sites are using. And we want to be able to acquire that in a flexible way, right? We want to make it easier for them. There's going to be both. Both of those are going to happen. Both those methods are going to be adopted. And depending on the company and their initiative and their digital strategy and the resources they have, they'll go whichever way is the path to least resistance and higher quality, right? Quality will always win. And then it's time and cost after that. Um, there's an initiative inside the DTRA, the Decentralized Trials Research Alliance, that I'm running as the workstream lead with other colleagues of mine from pharma and tech, called BYOT, Bring Your Own Technology. And that is putting a framework together. We're releasing a playbook in July of 2025. We're releasing a playbook that will basically be the how you get a yes from pharma when a site asks, can I use my own system in your study and not the system you're telling me to use? And that would be e-consent, e-source. I don't want to log into your EDC ever again. Maybe the PI signs stuff there, but like, I want to use my e-source system and I want to send you data.
Yep.
And that is probably gonna maybe jump and piggyback on the pipes that the EHR data is going through as well. But what's happening now is these companies are deciding, like, should I make the e-source systems Fire HL7 compatible, or should I just be able to create another pipe and ingest from the sites that don't have an EHR? But the EHR initiatives are driving the transformation, and should we be thinking wider? And it's all related in some way, right?
Well, I certainly see this, this dual hat problem on the pharma side, which is I need to be able to do what the sites say they're going to do because I don't control the sites. But also, I need my system to be reliable and exactly the way I want it because I'm inflexible and it's how I have to run a study. So I need to tell them to do it my way. And I think the BYOT is an interesting framework to put it in, which turns things into APIs and standards. And as long as you meet my requirements, it's fine, right? You've created a capability requirement. And I'm going to ask you a question here, which is, I feel like in a lot of what we're talking about here, we start invoking the need for some middlemen. And
Mhm.
like I will call them honest brokers, and the honest broker might be the technology provider that's providing the e-source or the framework, or it might be um, because the site itself, this ain't their main business, and a tool like Epic is never going to do these things for them out of the box. Right. And so for them to take their
Yeah.
team and build out a whole infrastructure, which I've seen groups do, right? Um, is a big undertaking, but it's not going to scale well. It's going to work for I'll say it like the MD Andersons of the world, the MGBs of the world. They can go and invent because they have the budget from, whatever the massive research enterprise they have. Everyone else is like, I can't do that, right? I'm going to need middlemen to go do all this work for us. So I'm just curious what you think about is it an honest broker? Is it, even back to this question you had about um, you can't send all the data because it could be a problem to send all the data that you don't need, right?
Right.
You could just go throw out, here's the full record of this patient. And I think a lot of life science companies say, I don't want that,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I want to be exposed to the subsets I need. And so who's going to be in between? Because if you put on the site, they're like, I have no way to subset this thing for what you need. That's not what my team does, to create a whole IT department for each study to, basically make a little like machine to slice the data down by hand for your custom study. So I'm just wondering how you think it's going to play out.
I think the honest broker idea is interesting. Let's dissect this a little bit. So the you have these sites, hospitals, small sites, big sites, whatnot, that have data. The data is being sent across electronically to various locations where the connection is available. Um, there are real world data companies that are extracting data, and they're either paying the sites for their data. The sites are basically selling their data to real world data companies that are aggregating it and selling it to pharma. And then a result of these big hospitals are getting like either whole appliances installed in their server rooms, or they're getting reports and stuff back as a result of something that they get value out of. And then so that's how the real world data companies are getting their data, but it's being extracted from the sites, right? And so I don't know if they're an honest broker, but they're a third party between the site and the data, right? And then the pharma. For the use case of EHR for research, are you suggesting that maybe there's a need for like a health information exchange type thing for research data pulling out? Like,
I
is
think I
that,
think that's what comes to mind when you say these things. That
yeah,
the process of appropriately managing the data is one part zero, one part technology, one part
yeah,
RWE, right? That
yeah,
it's not like any one hat would work. If it's just a pass through, which actually is like an HIE, doesn't do a lot of manipulation of the data it sends through,
right,
right? It's not
right.
like,
But they might make it available,
yeah,
normalize it a bit more, so
yeah,
you can just get the data in a better format, right?
yeah. They'll
Um,
clean it up a
the
little bit to make sure it's nice. Maybe it's nice looking, but they're not going to go in and say, "Oh, I'm only going to send you the 6 fields you need, Bob." That's your
right,
and so, but here
yeah.
it's more complex,
I
right?
think that
Workload.
th- this honest broker thing, I think, does depend on where you are in the world. I think that if you were in a socialized country with socialized medicine, single payer, it might be easier because that data is technically coming from one place, maybe a couple places that's government controlled, state controlled, or in the US, I just don't think it'll ever work anytime soon because of and even across Europe, GDPR has very strict regulations on what to store, but they still have countries that are socialized where they can get at this data. Everyone has a national health ID. Everybody has the ability to get their data easily around where necessary, and people can find it and get at it with access much easier, right? In the US, it's just so fragmented that even the thought of anybody trying to aggregate all of your data for research purposes freaks people out from a privacy perspective because of the nature of the
Maybe
way our
not
system
all
works.
of your data. I was thinking more of an honest broker in the workflow for the patients already consented on a study. That neither the pharma nor the health system's in a good position to perform the filtering role. They both could
But
conform the treatment
that's
and receipt role, but they're somewhere in between where they're like, I guess we can have our people manually do it. I'm just thinking of a study with 50 sites, and you say, hey, each site, I want you to only give me this subset of your data.
and to your
And
point
now they're like,
earlier
well, now
about
I'm building like I'm a robot at each site, which is going to look exactly the same, but they have to do it from scratch.
well, to your point earlier about large pharma companies that with big budgets and large sites with big budgets to be able to do some of the stuff, but for the smaller folks, that would be quite a service or a benefit, I think, to the smaller folks that aren't going to pioneer that themselves, right? So if you're talking about an honest broker sort of data mart for consented patients in a trial that can be spun up on a per trial or a per company basis, I feel like that is a unmet need that no one really has yet.
Yes,
So that's something that maybe should work on that.
agreed. Well, we'll
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
I'm interested to how it all play out because I think I see a variety of models coming out, none of which have taken off like a rocket, right? So
Hmm.
when I think of the steam engine, I don't know if you ever read this book. There was a book about like the history of the steam engine, and the
Hmm.
first thing they did with the steam engine is they made a tool to mine coal faster. And what it did was because coal powered the steam engine, it had a net positive gain, and they could just mine coal tons of fast and use the steam engine. Like, hey, we can use this for all sorts of stuff, right? Because they had this
Right.
net positive. So if you know, and I think we're still lacking the invention with the EHR data for clinical studies that's like a steam engine, right? It's got enough net
Yeah.
benefit that people are just going to keep expanding it on all sides, sticking a train,
I'm,
you
yeah. I mean,
know,
there's going to
everywhere,
be more.
right?
There's more value you can extract from that data in a number of ways. Like we were talking about, mostly moving data across, dealing with the management of that data, the harmonization, make sure that data is clean and then used in the right places to make the site experience better, to reduce cycle times in data management, to speed up the acquisition of that data, which then speeds up the management and the use of that data in some kind of analysis. Like I could see a world where this is flowing. Like the need for an interim lock is almost not necessary because it's just happening in real time, like all the time, right? I could also see the use of AI replacing a lot of these edit checks that people would be typically putting in EDC because you needed to check the data that's being manually transcribed. But if the stuff is coming automatically from the source, and the source is already dealing with that kind of stuff, you don't need the same kind of management of data that we have in the past. So the entire role is going to change, which will reduce cycle times, reduce cost, and increase the speed. Not only the database lock, but just overall trial operations of getting this stuff done. Um, I also think that when you talk about the use case of like, just to flip back to like patient matching again, I've seen hundreds of companies claiming to do some kind of patient matching service at this point, whether it's technology driven or service driven. Um, so many of them are now, magically AI powered all of a sudden. But really, what it is we can match patients all day, whether the site takes a tool on their own, uploads a protocol to some AI tool, and then mines their local database of patients to find matches, and then sends out like an AI voice bot. I've seen some of these now are coming out that will call patients and interact with them over chats or voice. And you can ask questions about the trial. You can ask questions for pre-screening and get an appointment
Pretty cool.
super fast,
Yeah, pretty cool,
right? Imagine
right?
hitting that on like a list of like 300 people that you match and just hit the bot, and then make some of your first calls. But especially like the second or third time you try to call these people and they don't pick up, send the bots out and see if you get a different response. Um, but it's still, there is no guarantee that these tools improve enrollments.
Right.
That's still a behavioral problem, right? That is, unless your family or your doctor or some promise of free treatment or cheaper treatment or something is made to you and you think it's a benefit to your life, you're not going to do it. Um, and so that's where educating about research and making it more aware about what it is and why it matters to you is a very personal decision. And so the increase of data availability and the sort of improvement of AI powered tools to match patients only goes so far, and sponsors really aren't buying it. Like these tools, they're like the sites can buy it. You can reduce your workload. That's great. I only care about if more people are enrolling as a result, and that's not necessarily the tech that's doing that. That could be the way your site operates, the way you deal with patients, the way get a really good PI. Like it just depends on a
I
number
mean,
of things.
it sounds like because we're also somewhat skeptical because we worked on some projects relating to recruitment through AI to find the right list. And it does seem like the problems are not like you can't solve them with just the AI. A lot of this is the referral pattern correct for the patient when they see the right doctor? And is that the doctor that's supposed to talk to them about this particular kind of study to make it
Mhm.
work? I guess I'd argue maybe a lot of the AI companies are just naive, right? Like if we just throw AI at this problem, but it's like it's a social problem that you have to also throw the AI at. And people think like the sorting hat's the problem. right? Gryffindor.
Yeah.
Oh, Gryffindor. We found a Gryffindor. Good. We're good. All we need is
Right. Yeah.
Gryffindors. We're fine, right? But the reality is like, you're not at a Hogwarts, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
do have like a lot of other options here, right? You could just not be a wizard at all, right?
I mean,
Or,
when I've talked to a lot of companies that are doing this, they take a very boots on the ground approach. Human touch is important. Like that connection is important to really get trust from patients, especially in more diverse communities and people is different socioeconomic statuses that aren't in the big cities that don't really trust anything. That to understand that this would be helpful for them. Um, you just need a different approach in some cases, and the technology approach is not always the best. I think it's a helpful tool to make the process go faster, but in some cases, this shouldn't be the first thing to do just because it's cool. But it definitely
yeah.
helps for sure.
And maybe the place where you should fix it. And I was talking to someone at a big health system where they said, well, pharma always comes to us and wants to fix the trials midstream. And this is the group that applies AI and has all the data. And they're like, it's too late. However you wrote
Hmm.
the study, however you designed your recruitment strategy, everything you already did, the system behaves exactly the way you designed it and isn't working. I cannot
Yeah.
suddenly apply data and change your system. You made an inclusion criteria that was too restrictive or whatever it was. Maybe the right time to apply a lot of this stuff is just before the trial is starting to get contracted, or at least when it's being planned, and like apply these things so that you're ready at the get-go, thinking through all the problems we just talked about, right?
I mean,
Make sure
I
they're going
have
to make it.
seen.
Are we picking the right PI? Are we picking the right practices? Do we have them up and running with the right lists and go?
Yeah, I have seen sponsors double their enrollment of the use of some of these EHR matching tools. I think it is unique to certain indications where chronic diseases and stuff like that, where it's more effective for sure. And usually a high volume of patients that are in these studies, it has a there is a there is an effect here that is actually positive. So there is promise for some of these tools. So we keep watching as things evolve. I think it's going to get more interesting for sure. But the next 2 to 5 years should be pretty interesting, which is
So I know we've been on for a while, and I'm sure we could cover many, many, many more topics. Any closing thoughts? Maybe some vision. What do you think people are going to be seeing in the next year or two? What would be big stuff
yeah.
that's on the horizon that you can see that other people may have not looked at yet?
All right, here's a few things, right? So there's going to be continued investment in sort of the infrastructure around interoperability. It's going to be standards work. It's going to be technology. It'll be AI powered, this and that. But just the infrastructure around interoperability will be continued to evolve and get more investment, both from pharma, both from the healthcare enterprise, and I would even wager to say from the governments in different countries that are going to have more centralized initiatives to make this better. We've seen already from the FDA, the new FDA, if you will, new priorities that I think are better. Other people might question certain things, but one thing I will say is that the new heads of the FDA are very they want to be very innovative, and they are making changes of things that we've been asking for a decade for them to be more open to. And now they're starting to do this themselves, and they're going to use their things themselves. And you're going to start to see review times go down in theory. And I just want to be clear that the things the FDA are doing right now, regardless of who the boss is good. We should be looking at these things through a clear lens and
So
not through,
do
you
you
know,
think the FDA is
political
going to take
lens.
a leadership position here? Because I feel like they've been sort of very neutral in EHR-EDC or EHR into these things. They've said, hey, it's okay. Here's some guidance. Not,
Yeah.
like if the FDA really wanted to make, honestly, if the FDA said, we mandate you have an interface to EHRs by 2028, it's done.
Yeah. Yeah. So the
Right.
FDA won't do that. They'll never
I
do
know,
mandates.
I'm not going
Um,
that far, but I'm saying I think that pharma takes so much guidance from the FDA. Part of
mhm.
the reluctance to move forward is the worry that the regulators won't accept doing it a new way.
So here's the main thing on
Right.
that one, right? That's going to drive a lot of this. So I put a article on LinkedIn right around the time of the DIA conference mid-June that took an analytical look at the priorities. You can link it in your show notes later. But the one of the main things I saw this, it's like wasn't explicitly defined in the paper that FDA published a paper in the JAMA journal on their new priorities, right? And but the thing that I caught away from that was the FDA is just being more open to these type of tools, which means in general, the fear of being rejected by somebody who doesn't trust any of these things, they don't know about it, they're not using it themselves, is just an overarching thing that pharma has. And when they ask, they don't get a clear answer. Now, with them using these things and implementing these things themselves and being asking to see more of these things, that fear is going to go down just inherently. And you're going to see more and more of these approvals happening as a result of taking
That would be
more
really
innovative
cool.
steps.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'm like nuts. Would be the FDA does run their own trials. If they mandated on their own trials, they had to use these kinds of technologies because instead of being a laggard, they were a leader.
Mhm.
Pharma would take note.
Oh, for
As
sure.
will
So
as will would everybody, because I do think that it's interesting that you said the reason why we have interoperability. Health systems actually have not wanted interoperability. It's really good for patients.
it's
It's
really good for
not good
patients.
for health systems economics when they have to add new infrastructure to interface that isn't paid for and other things. So the only thing that seemed to have gotten it done
Mhm.
is the regulators came in and said, do it this way. And I
Mhm.
do wonder in the back of my head that it'll take the regulators to push a little bit to get
Yeah.
a bunch of like squeaky wheels to sort of smooth out a bit. Because I think that
And it always does, right? I mean, we've had the latest guidance for the ICH, revised their E6 R3 that we're at now. So that's making changes that are going to cause people to move. I mean, and when revision 2 came out years ago, we got risk-based monitoring, and all of that kind of happened. And when it was sort of mandated, people did things, and it was good for the industry. So we'll look for more of that. So investment in infrastructure. I think we're going to see regulatory acceptance of more of this stuff. It's not going to be a mandate, but you're going to have more and more acceptance of this that will help make more decisions on the pharma side more concrete and make increase adoption. You're going to, if anything, in regulatory, and we won't go into this deeper, but I think you're going to see some deregulation, which is
right.
also going to help in what we're trying to do. I think you're going to see a lot more these AI co-pilots, if you will, for sites and CRAs are going to help them do their jobs faster and more efficiently. They're going to be doing some of the stuff on their own without asking, which is
Right.
going to
Mhm.
be a question. Like, I'm putting my protocol in these tools. It's not my protocol, it's their protocol. So is that okay? And
Right.
who do you have to tell about that? These are going to happen, right? It's going to help the sites do things faster. It's going to help them find patients faster. It's going to help them reduce their workload. But what does that mean for, privacy and whatnot?
With
Um,
these AI co-pilots are kind of like these agentic models where it's sort of
yeah, that's
I
coming.
can sit next to this thing and it just does the thing I normally would do. It's maybe the next generation of RPA,
Yeah,
robotic
yeah, yeah,
processes,
yeah.
where now they're AI processes, and it's like, yeah, you can do this, but I can do it too. I can
hmm
impersonate you
So, so
and
we're
go
gonna
same things you can do.
we're gonna
Uh,
move from data. What's the word? Some data collection, which is what we do today, to sort of data orchestration. Right. And this is the final thought I'll leave you with, which is as we're grabbing data from different sources across different sites, both in the US and around the world, because like Europe is starting to adopt interoperability standards that we are, Fire HL7 is there, Japan is doing it. And so like the standards that we are using for interoperability, the rest of the world is starting to pick up on it. And they're adding their comments as well, but that will become a global sort of thing. Now it's going to be orchestration of all these different sources coming in and normalizing it, making sense of it to just speed up the entire research enterprise. So that is a massive change you're going to see in the next few years. The EHR to EDC thing is just the beginning. And we've been talking about that since I've been since 2012, right? And
okay.
back then, I have myself on stage at DIA in 2012 saying this is the next thing. They were finally making progress.
Hmm.
And I just laugh at it when I was there because we've come such a long way
Yeah.
since then in the way the standards have changed, but not in adoption. So I think now we're finally at like a first real adoption spike, and it's only going to get better from there. So um, yeah, I'm
Well, it's
excited.
going to be exciting to like replay this and see how wrong we are. And where, it's always these questions of like, do we think far enough or near enough?
Mhm.
And I'm sure something amazing is going to happen.
No
Um,
doubt. Okay,
medicine's getting better. So thanks so much, Joe. I'm sure we'll all see you at Scope and DIA and all the places that I end up bumping into you at. And maybe we'll talk again, but this
would
is
love that.
and
Yeah, it should be an interesting year, and the fall I'll be on the road and most likely see many you and many of your listeners. So I look forward to it.
all right, great, Joe. Catch you soon.
Thanks so much.